Welcome back to our Lent Devotionals. Today we're going to continue to look at the story of Jesus before he died. We're going to be looking at Jesus' arrest, but before we jump into the passage we're going to read today, I just want to remind us kind of where we're at in the story of Jesus' last week. Jesus has had the Last Supper with the disciples proclaiming that he will die, and that's necessary. And they went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and they were praying there. And while they were praying there, Jesus is crying out to God and is saying, knowing the suffering that's coming, knowing what's about to happen, he's saying, it's too much for me. Would you take this from me? Would you make it so I don't have to go through this? But then immediately says, but you know what, God, not my will, but your will be done, saying that he is submitting to God's will and will go through with the plan. And he prays a couple more times, but then right after these prayers, he's immediately put to the test on that statement of whether or not it will be his will or God's will, and is saying, because Judas, the betrayer, comes and gets him arrested in the garden, and he's taken back to the Sadducees, to the high priest, so that they can be judged, or that he can be judged. And in the midst of this, I have to think all these people are coming, they're giving false testimonies, and they're trying to find a reason to be able to execute him, to say, you deserve death. And they're trying to trap him and say, hey, this is why he should die. But if you remember, through Jesus' ministry, many times the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the rulers sought to trap Jesus, sought to try and trick him or get him to say something that would get him in trouble, that would allow them to arrest him or put him to death. But every time Jesus is too smart, too wise, and through the power of the Spirit is able to thwart all of their plans. And yet this time, Jesus quietly goes along with the arrest and is silently standing before these false accusers who are trying to get him to die. And I think we see that one of the main differences is that Jesus knows this is my time. This is what God's asking me to do. And so he goes ahead and does it. And I think it's very interesting because we sometimes forget that Jesus is fully man. So all the same emotions that we would have, all those same thoughts that we would have are going through Jesus' mind. And so knowing that all these false witnesses are there, knowing that through the power of the Spirit that he would be able to thwart their arguments, confound them, and potentially just get away or just call angels to his side and say, hey, I don't want to do this. But that's not how he does. I'm going to pick up in verse 60 of chapter 14. This is what is going on. It says, then, after a lot of false witnesses have been saying things, and they can't convict Jesus because their arguments do not agree. So it's clear that they're false witnesses. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his clothes. Why do we need any more witnesses? He asked. You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, prophesy. And the guards took him and beat him. I think it's amazing that through all of that stuff, the arrests, the false accusations, everything that's going on, that Jesus is able to remain silent and allow the events to unfold because he knows this is what God is asking him to do. What I want us to think about today is what is God asking us to do? What is God asking you to do? Do you know something that God is saying, this is my will for you? And are we able, like Jesus, to say, this might be too much for me on my own, but not my will, your will be done. You can use me as you choose, even if it brings suffering, even if it brings hardship or it's uncomfortable or it's something I'm not used to. Are we willing to say that like Jesus, or are we going to shy away from it? I'm not saying this is easy. I think it's difficult. But I think Jesus shows us here that it really is important to follow the will of God. And I'm so grateful that Jesus does this, as this leads to our salvation and reconciliation and redemption. And yet Jesus had a choice here to choose to let this to happen or to not. And he decided he would do it, and he would submit his will to the Father and go along with the plan that led to our reconciliation and redemption, because he loved us and he loves the Father and he trusts the Father. And I just encourage you today that would you trust the Father? Would you trust that his will is better than ours, that his ways are higher than our ways? And would you submit yourself to him and go along with his plans, no matter what may happen?